Welcome, everybody, to the Integrity Restored podcast. I'm Jim O'Day, your host, and I'm blessed to be joined today by Patti Armstrong. Patti is a prolific author, has had a long career in the secular world, and now most recently in the Catholic world, writing a number of books. And the book we're going to talk about today is Servant of God, Michelle Duppong. And so, Patti, just wanted to welcome you to the show. Please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's an honor to be on the show. And I live in Bismarck, North Dakota, 10 kids, 21 grandkids. My youngest is 24. He was in the seminary for a year and just turned out. And I started out in social work, in the field of social work, got a master's in public administration, worked in that field. But I started out in journalism at the University of Detroit, took a year of journalism, did a lot of writing. It became my hobby, but once I stayed home and with the kids, I began writing full time. And I was writing in the secular world and doing quite well. For a while, I even wrote for the National Enquirer, and then decided, my faith was kind of, I thought, why did I go into social work? And my faith was kind of coming around, and I felt like it would be selling my soul to write for them, because they really didn't care about people. They just cared about scandal and getting people's attention. So I wrote for Woman's World for 10 years, and one day I thought, I've always loved writing. Since I was a little girl, I would staple together construction paper and write little books. And I thought, well, God has given me this gift. I'm going to give it back. And I said a little prayer that, I want to use my gift according to your will to glorify you. Well, all of a sudden, every story that I wrote for Woman's World had some kind of spiritual element, like somebody was praying or they felt the guardian angel was with them. And this was before the internet really took off and there were blogs. And I just started, I won't go into a big, long, boring story, but I started getting into more like Christian elements and writing. And before you knew it, I was full-blown Catholic writer. I have over a dozen books in publication at 5 publishers. I write for the National Catholic Register. I have a blog at PattiMcGuireArmstrong.com. So, and here I am, and a couple years ago I thought, I made so much more money in the secular world. Maybe I'll just do a little on the side. Just, a few articles here and there. But boy, did I feel the pushback. It's kind of like when you put the opposite poles of magnets together. I felt the pushback, and I realized, what? I will make enough, and I will be able to pay the bills. Yep. And I realized I don't really want to write for anything else, because, Jim, what an adventure.
Absolutely.
That something that I once thought would be very boring is the most exciting thing and the most rewarding and inspiring. I don't want to do anything else.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful story. And how God took you along that path, all leading to this. There's no accidents, no mistakes. Right. And and what a beautiful experience to have that thought of, well, if I go even just dip my toe in the secular world, I can make more money, which would be good. But God said, no, that's not what you're supposed to do, and you'll be okay.
Well, what I realized when I gave my gift to him, and then years later I thought, I'm just going to, do a little sideline here, just make some extra big bucks. I realized when I gave him my gift, I gave him my whole gift. He didn't want just part of it.
Right.
And for me to do that would be taking time away from serving him. And I'm telling you, there's so much inspiration, and the stories come to me, the books come to me. The first few books I wrote with Jeff Cabins and Matt Pinto, I did the Amazing Grace book series, and I became the managing editor, because really I ghostwrote most of those stories in the book, because I found out a lot of people, they'd have amazing stories, and I'd say, hey, contact me. Well, I'd never hear from anybody. And I stopped asking for them to contact me, and I would get their phone numbers. And I'd say, can I interview you? And you tell me your story. I'm going to write it up, and I'll give it back to you. And that's basically where most of those stories came from. But they were so uplifting. It really is God entering into people's lives. Mm-hmm. So just hearing their stories and writing them up, I would be so uplifted, realizing if God is that close to them, he's that close to me.
Right.
And so like usually it was 101 stories, but in the Amazing Grace for Married Couples book, it was only 12 stories, and they were very, very dramatic. I ghost wrote 10 of the 12 of those, and it was everything from gambling to affairs to drug and alcohol to pornography, same-sex attraction, the kind of stories that you would think there's no way this marriage is going to make it. And in the end, they were more in love than on the day they married.
Absolutely. It's an amazing journey that you and I have been blessed to witness. When a couple goes through these struggles and really heals and allows God's transformation, changes everything. And the marriage, many times when couples speak to me here in Integrity Restored, I'll hear from one or the other, well, I just want it to go back to the way it was. No, you don't, because that was broken. That's why we're sitting here talking today. You want it to be what God intends for it. And that's when the marriages really take off. So tell me a little bit, this Michelle Duppong story really caught my eye. She is a contemporary, a young woman in today's age who lived a dramatic, transformational life. And so I thought for our listeners and our viewers, this is a great portrait of what we can be. You gave your writing gift to God. She gave her whole life, not a part of her that wasn't given to God. What is it in our lives that we can give to God, especially if we're struggling with pornography or sexual addiction?
Surrender. We can give him our surrender. You don't know what he can do until you give him your life. And when we grapple with something in a human way, you know, I'm a widow, almost coming up on 2 years. We had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of challenges. We have 10 kids, 21 grandkids. And if it wasn't for our faith, and I know people say that all the time, but like when I did the Amazing Grace for Married Couples book, I talked about we began with the romance because everything's so beautiful. And I love what you said, Jim. You don't want to go back to the way it was because God has something even better for us. And that when you make mistakes and you overcome them through God's grace, you are in a better place than when you started. So who can best help a cocaine addict? Somebody who was addicted to cocaine. Who can help or a porn addict? Somebody who had been addicted. So that those are the people that are going to speak to you the most. So when we go to Michelle Duppong, we can say, well, she was virtuous, she was beautiful from day one. But she had such a love of Christ and was there for everybody. She didn't want to just become a saint. And this was some of her, at the end of each chapter, I have some of her writing. There is a collection of her writings and podcasts that were all gathered together. And the Michelle Duppong Guild put that together. You can go to that website because they're all about promoting Michelle. And I took parts of her writing and put it at the end of each chapter. And at one point she said, I don't want to just be a saint, I want to be a great saint. But as you read her life story and fall in love with her, I knew her, I knew her parents, but I thought, wow, you know, when I interviewed 50, 60, 70 people, it was just endless interviews and getting her story together to flesh it out so you really felt like you got to know her and went through her days and knew what her life was like. You knew she didn't just want to be a great saint. She wanted everybody around her to go to heaven and be great saints. So, and there wasn't any judgments. There wasn't that some people are better than others. She just had a love of Christ, and through that overflowed a love of others that she wanted to bring in. So much so that just to bring people up to speed, you know, she was at the age of 30 diagnosed with cancer. She just thought, oh, we're going to have must be some benign cyst. We're going to have a little simple surgery, outpatient. Instead, they find out she is riddled with stage 4 cancer and she's given 2 months to live. And because I knew her and I was in the diocese that she was working as the adult faith formation director, the word went out to pray for Michelle, that she was given 2 months to live. She fought her cancer and died a year later after the diagnosis. But when she was going from the Cancer Treatment Center of America outside of Chicago to get flown, and that was kind of a miracle in itself, how they were, because they didn't think they could get her from there to her home in Haymarsh, North Dakota, very small, unincorporated area outside of Glen Olin, very small town, about 40 miles from Bismarck, the state capital. When she was leaving for the last time, it took 4 hours for people to come and say goodbye to her.
Wow.
4 hours of everybody from the janitor to the doctors to the CNAs to other patients. What you think, what? How can somebody have that many people fall in love with them? Well, they are battling stage 4 cancer. Mm-hmm. Well, when you read the book, you're not surprised when you get to that point. But to realize how fully she was living that love of Christ, and that kind of, and the purity she had. And I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but there's a story when she was in college that just shows that one strong voice making a difference in the world.
Please share that story. I know the one you're talking about. Yes, please share that story.
So she was on the government of her dorm, her college dorm, and they were having a planning meeting for Easter. They wanted to do some kind of fun dorm stuff. And somebody suggested, and remember, like whatever people are dealing with as adults, when you're in the life of the college life and the dorm life and away from home, the level of anything goes is beyond what maybe we see in our here and now, because everybody there is like, whatever, So somebody had the suggestion, I know, let's have an Easter egg hunt and we'll put condoms in them. And so Michelle, who is so committed to the Catholic faith and everything about it, so the government president says, okay, we'll take a vote. How many ayes? And there were a few mumbled ones. And I interviewed somebody who was there at the meeting, a few mumbled ones. How many no's? And loud and clear, one voice said, no. And her roommate and best friend, who was sharing the story with me, said, and the president said, okay, it's no. And then they moved on. They moved on to the next business. She said it had only been her one voice, but it was louder than anybody else's, and it was unquestionable. It was unwavering, and that was the end of it. And so you realize that whether it's one light, one voice, that we can make a difference, and that even if we aren't there, we can look to them. We can look to the saints. We can ask Michelle to pray for us and not feel unworthy, because she wants to take us to where she is very likely now. She's a servant of God right now. The investigation, I don't know where they're at, but once they finish it, it goes to Rome, to the dicastery. If everything looks in order, then she becomes venerable. Once she's officially venerable, then you need one official miracle for her to be beatified as a blessed, and then one more for her to be canonized. But in the meantime, lots of people are feeling their prayers are being answered by asking Michelle to intercede for them.
Praise God. Praise God. And here's the amazing thing. And ladies and gentlemen, so often I'm guilty of it myself. When I think of saints, I think of the old pictures I see in the church or the old statues. But there's saints being made every day. Here was one who lived among us very recently and had the high school experience that we had, the college experience, the young adult experience. She was taken far too young. But she knows what everybody's going through because she lived here. She gets it. So what a beautiful intercessor to ask for our prayers. So one of the things that really struck me about Michelle was her accepting suffering and not complaining. Her focus was still always outward on that other person, that other soul. What can you tell us about that?
She was known by always saying, how are you? How are you doing? even when she called from the hospital to get her meal from the cafeteria. How are you today? And Dr. Leo Tagberg, who was a critical care or intensive care doctor at the Cancer Treatment Center, when he had Michelle as a patient after her surgery, he said, I had known of her before. I had heard about her, and she never complained. And how when she would say, how are you? Like he would come, even though when she wasn't his patient anymore, he would walk over to her room and see how she was doing. And he said, when she said, how are you? She meant it. So that the next time she would talk about what you had told her and wanted to know, how's this going? You know, she knew she had German Shepherds and how are they doing and how are your kids doing? She would remember. So it wasn't just flattery or, you know, just a false trait. Oh, how are you doing? She really meant it, and she cared about people. As a matter of fact, there was a fundraiser towards the end of her life at the it was the high school, now it's a junior high, St. Mary's Academy, and it was set up as a ball, and they had her all dressed up, and it was a lot just for her to get into her dress because she had tubes coming out of her, and there was a long line, and I was one of those people, and I thought, I just want to say, hey, Michelle, you're beautiful, and I'm praying for you, just to touch bases with her, just to make that contact. But you know, the line never let up. It was from the beginning until the end, and she kept wanting to know how other people were doing. And a lot of people were old friends and people she hadn't seen in a long time, and she cared more about them. She didn't want to talk about herself really. And there was a Caring Bridge site that her sister Renee, who had graduated in nursing and was in between jobs, and said, I will be there with her. And her mother was with her a lot along the journey to the, you know, the Mayo Clinic and the Cancer Treatment Center and the different hospital visits. And they saw how she was, she would share the story on Caring Bridge. There were over 250,000 people following her. The story was spreading far and wide, and people praying for her. And so they would let people know. And I was one of those people reading it. And I shared with somebody who said the same thing to me when I was reading about some of the big surgery and so much they had taken out. I thought, how could she still be alive? Like, what did they leave behind? How could they remove so much? But it was a major surgery because the cancer was everywhere, and they were treating it with a new kind of chemotherapy where it's low level, but you bathes, you know, all your organs and then slowly drains out. But you know, she just was. In the end, even though it looked hopeful in the beginning, it was a slow death, and nobody ever heard her complain. And yet, I think it's important to note, Jim, she was always praying for her healing. She never didn't want to get better. She was always taking care of herself. So we hear about victim souls, and I know some different servants of God and blessed and saints, that they took on this assignment willingly, and they wanted to even not get better. Michelle wanted to get better, but what she wanted more than anything was God's will. At one point, she was in her apartment before she had to move home, and somebody came to see her, and it's quoted in the book, and she said, Michelle, aren't you mad? Aren't you upset? Because she was so productive in her work. She was getting so much done and reaching so many people. And she said, aren't you mad? And she said, she pointed up to her crucifix above her head, and she said, I want what he wants. So she trusted. It was that surrender that we all have to give. It doesn't mean when she surrendered that everything went her way, that it was easy for her, but she kept turning everything over to God. And she knew that in the end, if she didn't get what she was asking for, whatever God wanted was going to be for the best. It was going to be for the greater glory of God. And so Monsignor James Shea, who was the president of the University of Mary, her last year spent there as a focus missionary, he writes in the foreword, why would God do this? She was young, she was vibrant, she had a serious boyfriend, she was evangelizing more than most of us will ever in our lifetime. Why would God take her away when she was being so productive? And he says, but look at how many people know about her now. And her greatest desire was to make Christ known to people and to draw them in. And that's what her life story does in a way that was beyond possible in her own lifetime.
Really incredible. So, one of the questions that really struck me as I was reading through the book is how can we use Michelle's example in our own journey? Because all of us are suffering with something. All of us are struggling with something. For most of our listeners and viewers, it's pornography addiction or betrayal trauma because of a spouse's pornography addiction. And so what struck me is the way that Michelle knew Jesus. She really, that was it. That was her primary relationship and a love story almost. How can we know Jesus that way? Because sometimes it feels so difficult.
You know what I think most people will find interesting? I know I was really surprised because she was serious about her faith. She came from a good Catholic family. And it wasn't until after college or in college where she developed a personal relationship with Christ. And she was dedicated to the rosary. She loved the Catholic faith. She loved to hear about the saints and martyrdom. She loved that. But it wasn't until her spiritual director said she was telling him about her day. And he said, but have you told Jesus about that? And she didn't think about having that kind of relationship. And you would think somebody like her, as serious as she was about her faith, because I interviewed her childhood friends who said, you know, Michelle wouldn't gossip. If there was gossip, she'd walk away. And she was just good and kind and always looking out for people from the very beginning. And yet you think, and Michelle didn't have a personal relationship with Christ? No, she didn't. But she learned that I need to just not just pray and talk about him, but talk to him. And so I think that's something all of us in our journey, in our struggles, we're all going to have different crosses and hardships and challenges that we talk to him about that as we go along. That and I recently just did an article for the Register. Have I turned it in? Yeah, I turned it in recently. About taking God from an idea to a relationship, and I realized that's what Michelle did. She and she had a beloved aunt who had brain cancer and died just shortly before she did. And they embraced. Michelle came in her wheelchair and went to go visit her aunt. And her aunt said, sometimes I don't feel him. And Michelle said, sometimes I don't either, but tell him. He wants to hear everything. Just tell him. And those two were embracing. And Jean's husband, Jim, said, how is it I'm in this room before two saints? And I knew Jean too. Just a wonderful, wonderful woman. But you think about one of the beautiful parts of Michelle, and we say it a few times in the book, is her extraordinary ordinariness. That when you talk about the stuff she did, and I told you a story about the dorm, and maybe the rest of us weren't quite that strong. Maybe a lot of us were the ones thinking, yeah, condom Easter egg hunt, that'll be fun. I mean, I wasn't very well catechized until later on in life, so I was like, whatever, I can totally relate to the people that came up with the bad ideas. You know, I had a lot of bad ideas myself. But to realize that once Christ comes into your life, the beauty and that you're not any less than those people that maybe started before you did or always got it right from the beginning. You're on the same plane. You are all seeking Christ and you're all in love with him. And you all have your different struggles. You know, none of us are without our struggles. And so we just need to keep turning it over to Christ, even in our failures, and getting back up. I mean, obviously the key isn't getting back up. My husband and I, we didn't just have like, oh, we had this, we're up here, we came down here and we recovered. Oh no, it was like a roller coaster. But what kept pulling us back up, what stopped us from getting a divorce was our faith, praying. At one point, it seemed like, and I mean, not to switch gears here, but at one point it just seemed like we couldn't get along. I don't know why. I couldn't remember why, but it just seemed like we couldn't work anything out. And I said, you know what? Why don't we do a novena of rosaries before the Blessed Sacrament? And we're like, okay, because like we didn't like each other and we're not getting along. So we did that. And without figuring anything out, day by day, everything was beautiful again. And it was supernatural because we didn't figure anything out. And so maybe whatever the problem was really nothing. It was just the devil. But Michelle understood that. And like when she was the director of the Adult Faith Formation, she put on a conference. And a lot of the people around her didn't think it was a good idea. She went to work, there was sometimes drama and gossip and stress. And she understood that when people vent, it's usually not healthy. I mean, you can express yourself to a trusted spiritual advisor. It might be your spouse, might be somebody else. But if all you're doing is venting your anger, it's not very productive. But one of her coworkers said Michelle believed that she could bring everything to Jesus and he would make it better. So she had an in-house retreat for the staff. And he goes, I think that was her way of dealing with some of the stress or, whatever was going on at that time. And then she put on this big retreat, conference. It was a 3-day conference. She called it the Thirst Conference. The bishop gave her permission. But a lot of people are like, we just had this big centennial celebration and this is going to be a lot of work. I think a lot of people thought, boy, is she naive. She wants to do something big, but she doesn't know what she's doing. Well, 7,000 to 8,000 people came. It was a huge success. And she shared with somebody at one point who was accompanying her to the cancer treatment center when her sister couldn't make it for treatment. And she says, what personality type are you? I know there's sanguine and there's different kinds of personality types. And Michelle shared that she was whatever the personality type is that's a big control freak and critical. And her friend is like, you, Michelle? And she goes, oh yeah, without God's help and virtue, that would be me. So during the time when she had so much to do, when it would get to her, she realized I need to let other people get involved and hand things over to them. So I'm not being a control freak. But she wasn't better than the rest of us, but she coped with her personality traits and challenges by turning everything over to Jesus and surrendering.
And I think such a big part of recovery, of the recovery journey of transformation, is surrendering. So that has come up multiple times in conversations today. I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's what God is asking us all to hear at this moment. And Patti, where would people go to find your books if they were interested in the book about Michelle or any of the other books you've written?
Well, if you go to I don't even have this book on my website yet. I just realized because it's newly released, it's only been officially released for 2 weeks. The name of the book is Michelle Duppong, Hope in the Depths of Suffering. And Sophia Institute Press is the publisher. You can get it wherever books are sold. A lot of times people think they have to order everything online. If you go to your local bookstore and ask them if they can get it in, if they don't already carry it, they can get it in for you, or you can order it online. And if you just look up books by Patti Armstrong, I have a lot of books out there, and I gave my gift of writing to God, and after the Amazing Grace books, I said, okay, God, if you want me to do any more books, you're just going to have to let me know, because I'm not out there trying to convince anybody of anything. And I think probably my last 5 or 6 books, publishers have come to me and asked me to do these books, and I pray about it. And so often it's like, okay, God, I'm still here. If you want me to do anything, just let me know. And then oftentimes within the next day or a week, I'm being asked to do a book. And anybody who thinks, wow, you're an author, like I've done talks with the different writing groups, and in the end, if you're not serving God, none of it matters. If it doesn't matter, we're all going to die someday. And my glory isn't in how many books I have published, it's how did I serve God. And because I've surrendered and given everything over to Him, He takes me places, He gives me inspiration, He gives me assignments that at times I'm like, okay, how am I going to even do this? I'm so busy. But you realize that He's the one directing everything, and you're following, and then it becomes a beautiful journey. And then you don't have to make it all about you. You don't have to make everything happen. He's going to be the one to open the doors. And in the end, all it matters is if you're serving God.
Amen. Amen, Patti. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this has been a real pleasure, and to learn more about Michelle's life, and certainly add her to our list of intercessors, I think is a wonderful idea. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, if you have enjoyed this program or any of our products and services, and you can make a donation, please do so. The only reason we can keep doing this important work is through the help of friends like you. May God bless your journey.